Tonight on Let It Rip.
The likelihood there's going to be the Taliban overrunning everything and owning the whole country is highly unlikely.
But that's exactly what happened. In just 11 days, what the U.S. spent 20 years and more than $1 trillion trying to build has turned to chaos and fear. At first, President Biden blamed his predecessor, who made a peace deal with the Taliban.
They're looking to get this ended, and we're looking to get it ended. I think we all have a very common interest.
But now the new commander-in-chief says there was no way to avoid the messy evacuation that's left thousands of Americans stranded and left many here at home wondering, what was it all for?
The idea that somehow there's a way to have gotten out without chaos ensuing, I don't know how that happens.
Time to let it rip. On the panel tonight, Gerald Jerry Font, who actually served in Afghanistan and was awarded the Legion of Merit and the Bronze Star for his heroism in combat. But we begin tonight with two Gold Star families, both of whom have lost their sons in Afghanistan. Kyle McLean, the son of Geraldine and Michael McLean, was killed there in 2012. And Sergeant Joe Johnson, the son of Terry Johnson, was killed in 2010. Terry, it's been 11 years since your son died. What were you thinking and feeling this week as you saw the Taliban retake control of Afghanistan?
Well, at first it took my breath away. When I saw the plane and I saw the people on the plane trying to get out of the country and I saw them falling off of it, it broke my heart, because at first it's easy to think, what was this all about and why did Joe die? But then I had to remember that Joe died for a purpose. And I remember him sending me a picture of himself sitting on a donkey with all these little kids surrounding him, and they were laughing. And there was a picture of him handing out candy. And what I thought about was the fact that these soldiers not only performed military tasks, not only kept our country safe, but they gave dignity and joy and a taste of freedom to people who have never had that before. And that helped me realize that no matter what is happening right now, you can't take that away from them. And that is what Joe died for. There's a scripture that says, Jesus said, whatever you do for the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you do for me. So these soldiers were the hands and the heart of Jesus to these people, giving them hope. And that's what I need to remember, and that's what I need to focus on.
Well, Geraldine, I think there's a common thread that you see with Gold Star families. It's been 9 years since your son was killed by an IED, an improvised explosive device. But I think it's important to know that your son's mission was about more than just fighting.
Yeah, it's pretty much the same thing. I feel the military also has a humanitarian effort, and he and his troops were there in the small town of Salim-Macaw, and they were on their mission. They were doing what, they were told to do. They're strong men. They, were on their mission, and they unfortunately were doing a road clearing, and my son knelt on the bomb. And the soldiers that he was with stayed in Afghanistan for a year. When they were finished, they went back to that city, and the city was, having farmers farm, kids playing ball, people were in the city. They did their job. The military treated our men well. And I couldn't be more proud of what he did. I'm still sad that he's not with us today, but it's just, he did his job, and that's part of the job. We have a risk, but he was willing to do it.
And Michael, when you hear that, when you hear the progress that was seemingly made, and then you look at the current situation, what do you think your son would want us to do?
Well, when Kyle came home from Iraq, he knew, and in the conversation with him, he felt like Iraq was going to descend back into chaos. But he felt like that he and the rest of the troops that had served there had did their duty. And so you can't control everything, especially in somebody else's land. He was happy enough that he was there. He loved being in the military, but he was happy that he was there and he didn't feel bad, except, okay, it's gonna happen. I think he would have the same attitude now. He can't speak for himself and I can't speak for him, but I think that he would not feel that his life was in vain. And I think that Terry's point about you don't know what's going to happen. The seeds of what we've sown there might very well turn into something really positive. So we certainly can't change anything that happened already, but we're, like everybody else, watching, waiting, and hoping for the best. And maybe, I don't have very much confidence in the Taliban, but at the same time, they may not be as nasty as they've shown themselves to be in the past, though that may be naive on my part.
Well, Jerry, you know firsthand what it's like to face the enemy on the battlefield. We salute your service and your bravery in the line of fire. Can you just give us a glimpse of what happened and why you won the Bronze Star?
Well, I won the Bronze Star as a member of a number of task forces in Afghanistan. It was the same number task force where I was the officer. Actually, in full disclosure, Terry and Dennis and I have a little bit closer relationship because as a member of that task force, I was actually the officer where the residual risk was the approval level at my level, and I actually approved the mission on which their son was killed.
That's a heavy responsibility.
Yes, it is.
And so I ask you, when you look at the situation now, what do you think? What do you feel?
Well, it's war is an extension of policy, von Clausewitz. So you really have to look at the policy first and look at the strategies that were used to implement that policy. There wasn't a battle that was ever lost on a battlefield in Afghanistan by any of our troops whatsoever, and everybody performed gallantly and well. I don't think anybody should question the military tactically or operationally. I think really we need to pull back and look at our policies and strategies that were implemented. But certainly, I don't think anybody would have predicted this precipitous, precarious withdrawal that really seems more like an exodus now. And certainly, doctrinally, when you have U.S. citizens in a foreign country, you first think of a non-combatant evacuation operation. And that's really run by the State Department, supported by the Department of Defense. You get U.S. civilians out first, then it's the military. The last boots on the ground are the military. They should be casing the flag along with the ambassador and then moving out. And we shouldn't be leaving any U.S. citizens in a lurch. More than anything, that's what's painful right now. I mean, what has been the blood and treasure that's been sacrificed has been sacrificed. We can't take that back. But right now, let's not leave any further U.S. citizens in a lurch over there in Afghanistan.
Yeah, 2,400 U.S. troops gone, trillions lost. But 20 years, this was America's longest war. The American people were tired of it. Donald Trump signed a deal with the Taliban to set a date of May 1st for the American troops to withdraw. Joe Biden pushed it back to August, but both Republicans and Democrats said it was time to go. So what should we have done?
Huel, I don't think anybody's going to debate that, the country was war weary. But I think the question is not that we did the withdrawal. It's specifically now, as I alluded to, how it was done. It just seems very precarious and precipitous. And as I said, just basic doctrine tells you you have U.S. citizens in the country, you conduct a non-combatant evacuation operation first, lead Department of State, supported by Department of Defense, then you pull out the military. And it seems that we have it a little backwards.
Before we go, let me ask Geraldine, Terry, Michael, do you still see hope even in the chaos?
Yes, I do. Because I believe that these people have had a taste of what it is. And my feeling is that good will always win out. It always has won out. And as long as there is a spark of freedom and we have faith and we have hope, then there is hope for over there.
And I agree. I'll tell you, one of the things that ends up happening is no matter what happens, what you can remember is whether or not you acted honorably or not. And I think not most certainly the troops, but I think the United States acted honorably. It's easy to look back and judge, but when you're actually in the point where things are going on, sometimes you make the best decision you can make. And sometimes it works out and everything's glorious, and other times it's not. Well, okay, so we're looking back at right now and saying, well, okay, too bad we didn't do this or that. However, everybody's intent was honest, and most certainly I don't think their actions were dumb.
And as much as that was the saddest day in my life when they told us, we regret to inform you, since then, it has been one of the proudest moments of my life that my son and his troops and all the others that were there were doing their military job and did it to the best of their ability. And I do hope that there is hope for these poor people left behind as well. The girls, the kids. I'm just hoping that there's going to be something that will be good for them in the community.
Well,
To both of these families, I'd like to say one thing. Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. John 15:13.
And my son has that around his arm tattooed. As much
Joe
as
had
let me say to all of you,
on his arm as well.
let me say to all of you, our soldiers who made it home and those who gave their lives, we salute them and we salute you, their families, their mothers and their fathers, because you gave so much too. It's a debt we can never repay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, still ahead. We're going to talk about what went wrong and why we failed to see what was coming, plus a first-hand account of what the Afghan people are feeling right now as Let It Rip continues. Welcome back to Let It Rip. Beaming in right now via Zoom is Saeed Khan, professor of Middle Eastern history and culture at Wayne State University. Also with us, Javad Ali, associate professor of international policy and practice at the University of Michigan. But we begin this segment with someone who has a deep connection to Afghanistan and its people, Imam Ibrahim Kazarouni of the Islamic Center of American Dearborn. Imam, the average American knows so little about the countries outside of our own borders. You've been in contact with some of the families there. What are they telling you tonight?
Well, good evening, everyone. A little bit of correction. I have no contact at the moment with Afghanistan. I have contact with Afghani citizens and Afghani immigrants that have come to the United States. And we have been dealing with the families for the past few years. Unfortunately, the first thing that came out of it is the reticent and hesitant that they are to come out and say anything, because the situation in Afghanistan is so fluid, and they have a number of families back home that they don't want anything to happen to them. We have been trying to at least ask few of them if they are prepared to come out and speak on public media. They have refused. But the gist of what they are saying is that they are extremely afraid of what is happening in Afghanistan. And naturally, the Afghani community has to be divided into two groups. The younger generation, that they may not have been present during the 1995-1996 takeover of Taliban in Afghanistan and the consequence of that takeover. But the older one, the more senior members of the Afghani community, that they were present and possibly run away after that takeover, they are not prepared to accept the narrative of peace, the narrative of moderation, the narrative of that we are going to respect minorities, etc., because the frame of reference for them is what happened in 1995 and 96. They consider Taliban to be, because most of them, if not all of them, are Pashtun and tribally orientated, the mindset is, as happened, for example, a number of correspondents have clearly stated, even BBC correspondent was surprised to hear of this moderation narrative, despite the fact that they have made it quite clear in the past that once they take control, revenge is going to be the first thing. There are reports out that after taking the Bagram prison, taking over, releasing their own prisoners, between 400 to 600 Al-Qaeda members were killed. And these people have identified their own Taliban prisoners, have identified the list of interpreters, those who work with American troops and so on, which reprisal is going to be immediate. This is the tribal mindset. So 3 interpreters so far have been beheaded, and God knows. So the Afghani community here is extremely worried about their families back home. Some told me that their families have left major cities into, say, villages far away from major cities to at least to feel safe and be protected. But nobody knows. At this stage, nothing is clear.
Let me get to the professors. Now, Saeed, Javed, some people compare the fall of Kabul to the fall of Saigon, but the fall of Saigon took 2 years. Kabul fell within days. Why did we not see this coming?
Hugh, I would argue that there were a series of cascading errors that all contributed to the rapid fall of Kabul. But as things were developing in the summer, and it was clear the Taliban had momentum on its side on the battlefield and was cutting deals with tribes and local militias, why policymakers and military commanders in Washington and forward didn't understand that and adjust our response and posture, that is something that is very troubling to me as someone who came from that national security world in Washington. So there's just a lot of questions on the reality of what was happening in front of our eyes versus the decisions that were being made in Washington and then on the ground in Afghanistan.
And Saeed, go ahead.
Yeah, even tonight, we've heard that there was a memo at the State Department back in July warning of the urgency and the need to evacuate those, as the Imam described, who had allied and really staked their lives and livelihoods and security and safety, being interpreters and translators. So that sense of urgency was there. My guess is that that was taken into consideration. But part of this has to do with the confidence within the, well, now perhaps the former Kabul regime of President Ashraf Ghani. To go ahead and hit the proverbial panic button would have demonstrated that the United States no longer had confidence in the Ghani regime. There was a fear that that would have accelerated the inevitable of the Taliban coming in. As Javed said, they already had gained momentum. They were slowly capturing provincial capitals. And as of 3 days ago, they had captured now 26 out of 34 provincial capitals. So this idea then of the White House really being stuck in the middle of deciding, do we do what perhaps is reflexively important and needed to go ahead and start the evacuations? Or what is it going to mean beyond just the optics, that we're essentially abandoning not the Afghani people, but the stability of an Afghan regime, which proved to be completely unstable?
And I think many Americans can understand how we spent trillions of dollars only to see the entire Afghan army collapse within days.
But could I just add? Could I add one point?
Go ahead.
If you would have listened to President Ashraf Ghani's speech immediately after the sudden departure of the United States, he clearly indicated, if you read between the lines, he said that the sudden departure without being informed left us in a straitjacket. We have no way to deal with the events that are coming. And it's really fundamental problem for the Washington to assess and analyze the situation, that you have spent close to $1.5 trillion, 4 presidents, only to replace Taliban with Taliban. And that doesn't, you don't need much better description of than the failure of the whole system. President Ashraf Ghani clearly indicated in a speech that he gave, well, some people say in Tajikistan, some recorded, or whether it was in the United Arab Emirates, that his move was purely to protect and preserve life. Otherwise, we would have gone towards civil war.
But, you know,
whether that is to trust it or not, that's a different story. But everybody else, all pundits around the world, all professors of international studies, or analysis outside in Europe, they saw this coming. But in the United States, we were not prepared to accept it.
And
we must not forget the 2,400 U.S. troops killed, but let us not forget, too, the 66,000 Afghan soldiers killed, the 47,000 Afghan civilians killed. Many of the Afghans feel betrayed, but as Americans, we can't understand why it seems that the Afghans gave up so easily.
And part of that, too, I believe, is the notion of a national Afghan army was always illusory. That there was never really a history of that within the country, as the Imam has said and Saeed has said. Afghanistan is organized at a very different level, and people, their affiliations are at the tribal level, at the clan level, the familial level. They don't rally around the Afghan flag the way we do here in the United States or other countries around the world. So we were trying to mold the Afghan army into our vision of what a military should look like, when that had never really existed in the history of Afghanistan. You throw in political corruption and the culture there. I mean, there was a lot of reasons why the military didn't do what we thought it would do, despite all the blood, sweat, and sacrifice that went into it.
The Taliban has initially promised to protect the rights of women. Do you think they will follow through on that promise, or should we still leave an American presence in Afghanistan even after the deadline?
I don't think leaving a presence is really going to then solve the issue of women's rights. And at what point do you then entertain the idea of going all in? I think it is ironic, as you mentioned before, by invoking Vietnam. Remember, Vietnam initially was not going to involve anything more than a few U.S. advisors. That then, to borrow a word that Javed said very aptly, it cascaded into something which then ended up costing 58,000 American service people's lives, countless hundreds of thousands of Vietnamese lives as well, and really all for naught. I think one of the main things that we're going to have to explore now compared to 25 years ago is, remember, during the Clinton administration, the United States had emerged as the sole superpower in the world. Today, there are several other players in the region that have a lot invested. You're talking about trillions that we essentially sank into Afghanistan and Iraq. The Chinese have staked 1.5 trillion into their new Silk Road, and it goes through Afghanistan. They're going to want a return on their investment, and the best way to get that is by stability. So I think that has to be seen. Russia has to be examined very closely, as well as some of the other neighbors. So for those who are necessarily already casting doubt about whether the Taliban are going to be any different, I think it's still a little bit premature to go ahead and make that assessment right now.
All right, we're out of time, but look, I want to thank you all for your comments and insights. No matter what happens, it's so important for us to get the thousands of Americans in Afghanistan out safely and to get our Afghan allies out as well. We thank you. Final thoughts ahead. Stay with us.
Afghanistan, what's going on there? It's probably 10 years too late.
I have no idea.
Well, I think that the Chinese are over there taking our lithium that we thought we were going to keep.
Why did we go in to get Osama bin Laden? They got him 12 years ago.
Do you think we should have stayed in Afghanistan?
I do.
To get rid of the Taliban?
Well, with the small force we had there, and all we really needed was air support.
What about how we got out of Afghanistan? Is that a problem?
That's a big problem.
It's pitiful to see these kids, these people, the other day hanging onto this airplane trying to take off and it's terrible.
You think of all the money we've spent that could go to infrastructure.
I do believe that the government will stabilize eventually, and hopefully things will work out and we'll have world peace forever.
We're out of time. Thanks for watching. Let it rip.